Something unbelievable just happened on the court, and the entire basketball world is trying to process it. Because after weeks of speculation, debates, music, and endless conversations about her role in the national team conversation, Caitlin Clark finally stepped back into the spotlight connected to United States women's national basketball team. And what happened next shocked everyone. Not just because Clark played well, not just because she controlled the offense, but because the moment she stepped onto the floor, the entire rhythm of the game changed. The ball started moving faster. The spacing opened up. Defenders looked confused, and suddenly, the offense began flowing in ways fans hadn't seen before. But the most shocking part of the night wasn't Clark alone. It was the chemistry that appeared almost instantly between Clark and Rhyne Howard. Two players, two completely different styles. But somehow when they shared the court, everything clicked. Fast breaks turned into highlight plays. Perfectly timed passes sliced through defenders, and the crowd inside the arena started realizing they were watching something special. Because the connection between Clark and Howard didn't look like two players still figuring each other out. It looked like two players who had been running the same offense for years. Howard cutting toward the basket at the exact moment Clark delivered the pass. Clark reading the defense before the play even developed. And possession after possession ending with the same result. Another basket. Another stunned reaction from defenders. Another roar from the crowd. By the time the second quarter arrived, fans watching the game began asking the same question online. Where did this chemistry come from? Because the Clark-Howard connection wasn't just effective. It was dangerous. Dangerous for opposing defenses. Dangerous for the hierarchy of Team USA's backcourt. And dangerous for anyone who thought Clark might struggle to fit into the national team system. But the moment that truly shocked everyone came later in the game. Because as Clark continued orchestrating the offense and Howard kept finishing plays with surgical precision, something else started happening. The conversation surrounding Team USA's lineup suddenly began shifting. Fans weren't just talking about Clark returning. They were talking about a new duo that might change the way the entire team plays. And if the chemistry between Clark and Rhyne Howard continues developing the way it looked on this night, Team USA's future backcourt might be far more explosive than anyone expected. For months, the basketball world had been circling around one name whenever the future of United States women's national basketball team came up in conversation, and that name was Caitlin Clark. Not just because Clark had become one of the most exciting players in the sport. Not just because her deep shooting range had already changed how defenses prepare for modern point guards, but because her presence seemed to represent something bigger than one individual player. Clark symbolized the next era of women's basketball. The era where the sport's popularity was exploding. Arenas were filling with new fans. Highlight clips were spreading across the internet within seconds. And a new generation of players was beginning to reshape the style of play. When Clark first began dominating at the highest levels of basketball, analysts quickly realized that her style wasn't just effective, it was disruptive. Her ability to launch three-pointers from distances that defenders weren't used to guarding forced teams to rethink their defensive strategies entirely. Defenders had to pick her up earlier. Help defenders had to stretch farther. And that spacing created opportunities across the entire floor. But even with all of that excitement surrounding Clark, one major question continued following her everywhere she played.
Could her style fit into the
structured system of Team USA? For decades, Team USA had been built around a specific identity. Disciplined defense, strong interior play, music, and veteran guards who controlled the pace with precision and experience. Players who had spent years mastering the rhythm of international competition. Players who understood how to adjust their games depending on the opponent. Players who had already proven they could perform under the enormous pressure of representing their country on the global stage. Clark, on the other hand, represented something different. Creativity, freedom, unpredictability. Her style often looked like controlled chaos. She could launch a three from 30 feet one possession and deliver a no-look pass through two defenders on the next. That unpredictability made her incredibly exciting for fans. But it also raised questions about how easily she would adapt to a system built around structure and discipline. For a while, those questions remained unanswered because while Clark continued delivering spectacular performances in the WNBA, The conversation about how she might fit within Team USA's lineup remained mostly theoretical. Analysts debated it endlessly. Music. Some believed Clark's offensive creativity could unlock an entirely new dimension for the national team. Others believed the team's established structure might limit her freedom to play the way she normally does. And then there was another layer to the conversation. Competition. Team USA's roster has always been filled with elite players. Veteran guards who had already built impressive careers. Young stars who were rising quickly through the ranks. Players who had already proven themselves capable of running the offense against the best teams in the world. Which meant Clark wasn't just entering a system. She was entering a competition for control of the backcourt. And that competition made every moment she stepped on the court even more important. Every possession became a chance to prove she belonged. Every assist or turnover became another data point for analysts watching closely. But while fans were focused on Clark's role, another player was quietly becoming one of the most dangerous scoring threats in women's basketball. Rhyne Howard. Howard had already established herself as one of the most versatile offensive players in the game. Her scoring ability, her defensive instincts, her ability to create shots under pressure, all of it made her one of the most valuable players on the floor. But what many people hadn't considered until this particular game was how style might complement Clark's. Because while Clark thrives as a playmaker who stretches defenses with her shooting range, Howard excels at attacking defensive gaps and finishing plays with confidence. In theory, that combination could be devastating. Clark drawing defenders with her long-range shooting. Howard cutting through open space created by the defense scrambling to react. Clark delivering precision passes. Howard finishing the play with athletic scoring ability. But theory and reality are two very different things. Chemistry between players usually takes time. Months of practice, multiple games, learning each other's tendencies, understanding where a teammate likes the ball, understanding when they prefer to attack or pass. That kind of connection rarely appears instantly, which is exactly why what happened when Clark and Howard shared the floor during this game shocked everyone watching. Because instead of looking like two players still adjusting to each other, they looked like a fully synchronized backcourt. And once fans started noticing how effortlessly their styles fit together, the excitement surrounding Team USA's future lineup began growing rapidly. But the real moment that made everyone's jaws drop was still coming. Because the chemistry between Clark and Howard wasn't just good, it was about to become unstoppable. And when the sequence that stunned the arena finally happened, the internet would explode with reactions. When the ball tipped to start the game, most fans expected something fairly predictable. They expected Caitlin Clark to run the offense for a few possessions, maybe knock down a couple of threes, maybe deliver a flashy pass or two. After all, Clark had already built a reputation for spectacular plays. But what they didn't expect was how quickly the game would begin revolving around the connection between Clark and Rhyne Howard. Because the very first time Clark crossed half court, something unusual happened. Howard made a sharp cut toward the wing. Clark didn't even hesitate. Without looking, she fired a pass across the floor that landed perfectly in Howard's hands. Three-pointer swish. The crowd erupted. It was a beautiful play, but at first it looked like nothing more than a well-executed possession. Then it happened again. A few minutes later, Clark drove toward the top of the key, drawing two defenders with her. Instead of forcing the shot, she kicked the ball out toward Howard, cutting through the defense. Another open look, another basket, and suddenly fans inside the arena started realizing something. These two players were reading each other perfectly. Clark seemed to know exactly when Howard would cut. Howard seemed to anticipate exactly when Clark would deliver the ball. That level of chemistry usually takes months to develop, but here it was appearing in real time. Possession after possession, play after music, play. Then came the moment that truly changed the energy of the game. Clark grabbed a defensive rebound and immediately pushed the ball up the floor in transition. Defenders scrambled to recover. Howard sprinted down the wing. Clark launched a pass from nearly half court that curved perfectly over the defense and landed directly in Howard's hands for a fast break layup. The arena exploded. Commentators practically shouted over each other. That connection between Clark and Howard is unbelievable. By the end of the first quarter, The stat sheet was already telling an incredible story. Clark had several assists. Howard had multiple scoring plays created directly from Clark's passes. And the defense looked completely overwhelmed because every time defenders adjusted to stop Clark's shooting, Howard slipped behind them for an easy scoring opportunity. And every time defenders tried to shut down Howard's cuts, Clark punished them with another deep three. It was a nightmare scenario for opposing defenses. But the real conflict of the night started forming as analysts began noticing something else. The rest of the guards connected to United States women's national basketball team were struggling to keep up with the pace Clark was creating. Clark wasn't just playing fast. She was controlling the tempo of the entire game. Every possession seemed to move according to her decisions. She slowed the offense when necessary, accelerated the pace during fast breaks, directed teammates into position like A. For a moment, Clark appeared trapped. The crowd held its breath. But Clark simply smiled, pivoted slightly, and delivered a perfectly timed bounce pass between the defenders straight to Howard, cutting toward the basket. Howard finished with an easy layup. The entire arena exploded. Not because Clark had just turned the defensive trap into another highlight play. That moment changed everything. The defense looked stunned. Commentators replayed the pass several times in slow motion. Fans pulled out their phones to capture the replay on the big screen, and social media immediately began flooding with posts about the Clark-Howard connection. By halftime, the numbers were already staggering. Clark's assists were climbing rapidly. Howard's scoring continued rising, and the offense looked unstoppable whenever the two players shared the floor. But the real shock was still building because the chemistry between Clark and Howard wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was about to become even more explosive. And when the second half began, and what happened next would push the conversation about Team USA's future backcourt into an entirely new level of debate. When the second half began, the atmosphere inside the arena had already changed. Fans weren't just watching a game anymore. They were watching a duo forming in real time. Because the connection between Caitlin Clark and Rhyne Howard wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was getting even more dangerous. During halftime, coaches and defenders had clearly discussed one thing. Stop Clark. They began picking her up much earlier in the backcourt. Two defenders sometimes stepped toward her before she even crossed half court. They attempted traps. They tried to force the ball out of her hands. For a few possessions, it looked like the strategy might disrupt the offense. Clark passed the ball earlier than usual. The defense seemed determined to prevent her from controlling the game the way she had in the first half, but that's when the real revelation happened. Clark didn't need the ball every second to dominate the game. Instead, she began manipulating the defense without even scoring. She moved defenders with her presence. She pulled defensive attention toward the perimeter. And every time the defense shifted toward her, Howard attacked the space. One possession perfectly captured the problem the defense was facing. Clark dribbled toward the top of the arc. Two defenders stepped toward her immediately, worried about the deep three-pointer. Clark calmly pivoted and delivered a bounce pass toward Howard.